If you think the sparkling crown on the head of Camilla is an eternal guarantee of a victory, you are completely mistaken. In the British royal family, true power never lies in oversized diamonds or fake triumphant smiles before the cameras. It lies in who holds the key to the future. Camilla, the woman who spent half her life forcing her way into a family she did not belong to, the one who did not hesitate to trample on the happiness of others to climb to the throne, was perhaps confident that she was safe. But last week, in a room at Windsor Castle, a bloodless coup took place, dealing a heavy blow to the illusion of power of Camilla. Inside those 4 marble walls, there was no screaming, only the truth. Prince William, with the absolute composure and majesty of a future king, stood there, looked straight into the eyes of his father, and completely shattered the core position of Camilla from the royal future. In contrast to the proud and radiant demeanor of Princess Catherine, a woman born to be a true queen, revered by the public, Camilla could only stand in stunned silence. That usurper finally realized that all her cunning tricks and manipulation over decades were about to be mercilessly wiped out. The secret document resting in the hands of William was the very verdict that sealed the fate of her power. Do you believe that the cunning woman truly won this family war? Or is it Prince William who holds the final move? Please comment number 1 if you choose Camilla, and number 2 if you believe in the ruthless but highly justified rise of William. Leave your choice, because the dark truth behind it will make you shudder. But to understand why William could deliver that fatal blow right in front of his father, we must take a step back and look at how this future king silently stripped away the ultimate weapons of Camilla, money and access privileges. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, the media focused their eyes on the moment Charles finally wore the crown he had been waiting for his entire life. But behind the closed doors of the palace, a true, silent, ruthless, and much more calculated transfer of power quietly took place. Prince William officially took over the Duchy of Cornwall. Let me make this clear for you. To the true elite, this is not a frivolous gold-plated title to print on a business card for prestige. It is a massive real estate and financial empire, a giant money-printing machine with assets worth up to £1.2 billion. It is the lifeblood, the strategic safe, the ultimate weapon, guaranteeing the absolute power of the future king. For many decades before that, when Charles still held this fund, he turned a blind eye, allowing Camilla, the cunning woman who ruthlessly trampled on the tears of Princess Diana, to slowly sink the tentacles of her family into the sacred financial machinery of the royal family. Camilla smiled triumphantly, believing that this kingdom was already in the palm of her hand. But that manipulative woman forgot one core thing. William is not his weak, easily manipulated father. He is the son of Diana. And as soon as the ink of William was dry on the Cornwall takeover papers, the invisible guillotine blade was sharpened, ready to clear out those who do not belong here. The first target in the root and branch campaign of William was none other than Annabel Elliot, the biological sister of Camilla. As you probably know, the Parker Bowles family never possessed a royal demeanor. They are just a bunch of opportunists, longing to climb high, craving to grab privileges they will forever never deserve to enjoy. For 20 long years, taking advantage of the blind infatuation of Charles, Camilla brazenly arranged for her sister an interior design contract so lucrative it was ridiculous. For 20 years, Annabel Elliot calmly pocketed huge fees, spending money from the treasury of Cornwall to decorate properties that were not even hers. That was a blatant extortion, a bunch of parasites sucking the assets of the crown to enrich their personal interests. But upon taking power, what was the first action of William? A cold, decisive administrative death sentence. There was no warning call in advance, no fake reconciliation sessions over afternoon tea. With just a stroke of the pen, William completely cut off the 20-year contract of Annabel in just one night. Every invoice was rejected, every power was stripped away immediately. William did not need to use the press to smear or spread trashy rumors the way the faction of Camilla often did. He used his absolute economic power to choke the lifeblood out of his opponent. This is how a true king acts. No noise, not a drop of blood shed, but the blow delivered is fatal. Straightforwardly severing this blood-sucking tentacle was the way William looked directly into the face of his stepmother and firmly declared that the parasitic era of her family had been officially buried. However, that purge was only the opening shot. The Parker Bowles crowd has long been accustomed to being domineering, holding illusions about their position in high society. Among them, we must specifically mention Tom Parker Bowles, the son of Camilla, a guy who always wears a hollow, arrogant look by hiding in the shadow of his mother. Under the indulgence of Charles, Tom enjoyed a privilege that even many internal members with blue blood had to envy: the freedom to access the palaces. He possessed a VIP guest card, swaggering in and out of historic castles as if they were his own backyard, enjoying the begged halo from the sins of a mother who barged in and destroyed a family. Prince William and Princess Catherine had to grit their teeth and endure this eyesore for too long. Catherine, a graceful woman, a symbol of perfection, and a wonderful mother who dedicated her entire youth to maintaining the dignified image of the crown, had to patiently share the sacred space of the family with these gold-digging strangers. But William is now in power, and he is determined not to let his beloved wife suffer that humiliation for another moment. The second punitive blow was delivered just as fiercely. William ordered the complete revocation of the access privileges of Tom Parker Bowles. The powerful VIP card was cancelled mercilessly. No press release was issued, just an updated command line on the internal security system. From someone who deluded himself into being a prince, Tom was demoted straight down to a commoner and nothing more, someone who would have to stand waiting at the security checkpoint and be kicked out if he did not have a valid invitation. That was a slap that made no sound, but it hurt to the bone marrow. It smashed the fake pride of Camilla and her son, reminding them to remember very carefully their true position and origins. This suffocating strategy of William demonstrates an outstanding political vision. The audience may be used to noisy verbal battles or cheap expose memoirs, but at the peak of power in the United Kingdom, you do not destroy your enemies with words, you destroy them by depriving them of their oxygen, and here, oxygen is money and access. Camilla may have spent half a century using every trick to manipulate a weak king, but she is completely powerless before the future king who holds the keys to the kingdom. William stands tall like a fortress wall, protecting Catherine, protecting his children, and protecting the priceless legacy of his mother with a ruthlessly cold mind. A financial purge, no matter how ruthless, is only the tip of the iceberg. The real weapon that pushed Camilla into a corner did not come from any public enemy, but from a hidden corner in the past that no one expected. If you think the British aristocracy easily forgets moral stains, you are mistaken. And the revenge shot that ended the royal illusion of Camilla was pulled by the very man whose honor she trampled on most ruthlessly, Andrew Parker Bowles. For more than 3 decades, Andrew Parker Bowles appeared in the eyes of the public as a faint ghost, a resigned and submissive ex-husband. The London elite still often whisper to each other about his incredible endurance of humiliation. One can only imagine the bitter humiliation of a proud cavalry officer, coming from the traditional upper class, having to watch helplessly as his wife sneakily, and then publicly, climbed into the bed of the Crown Prince of England. Camilla, a woman with sky-high ambitions but hidden under the guise of a contented person, used Andrew as a perfect screen, a stepping stone to enter high society, before putting on his head the greatest horns of cuckoldry in modern royal history. She turned her husband into a laughingstock for the whole kingdom, tearing apart his self-esteem just to satisfy her ultimate thirst for power next to a weak and selfish Charles. Because of the unspoken rule of the aristocracy, stiff upper lip, which means keeping a calm attitude and not showing emotion, and wanting to protect his children, Andrew swallowed his blood back inside. He chose silence. He stepped aside, accepted the divorce, and stood in the shadows watching his betrayer put on luxurious gowns, step by step entering the royal family. Camilla probably firmly believed that Andrew was a coward, a completely neutralized pawn who would forever never dare to speak up. But she was wrong. All endurance has its limits. One must ask why it is happening right now, and why, after all these years of gritting his teeth, Andrew decided to deliver the finishing blow. The answer lies in the ultimate brazenness of the royal public relations machine since Charles took the throne. To force the public to swallow the image of a Queen Camilla, Charles has spent millions of pounds mobilizing all media power to mold the most large-scale and disgusting history whitewashing campaign ever. They tried to rewrite the story, describing Camilla as a pitiful victim of circumstances, a resigned woman sacrificing for true love, a solid rock beside the king. They tried their best to erase all memories of her cruelty towards Diana, ignoring the truth that she was the third person who heartlessly destroyed a family and pushed others into tragedy. Seeing the person who destroyed his life now being hailed as a highly virtuous saint, the disgust within Andrew reached its peak. He could not accept history being blatantly distorted. The honor of a man did not allow him to continue tolerating this hypocrisy for another second. And so, the secret vault of documents, the undeniable evidence of cunning plots, dirty under-the-table deals, and the darkest truths about how Camilla manipulated Charles and the media to pave her way to the throne were brought out of the safe. However, what made this plot twist excellent was how Andrew delivered the blow. An ordinary person would take this file and sell it to the Daily Mail or the Sun in exchange for several $1 million and a week on the front page. But Andrew is a sharp aristocrat. He knew that the press could be silenced by the palace, sued, or twisted by the lawyers of Charles. No, this weapon of mass destruction needed to be given to the only person with enough strength, enough power, and enough hatred to turn it into a death sentence for the position of Camilla. That person could only be Prince William. There were no noisy meetings, no traces of phone calls or emails that could be sniffed out by the security minions of Charles. Andrew used an internal network, absolutely loyal old friends in the elite, people who were also extremely irritated by the arrogance of the faction of Camilla. The file was handed directly to the core team of William, completely clean, leaving no trace. This event marked an invisible alliance, a silent handshake between two men of two different generations, but sharing the same pain of being betrayed by the same woman. On one side was the husband turned into a fool before the whole world. On the other side was the son who had to witness his mother, Princess Diana, cry her eyes out and depart forever because of the ambition of a third person. Both Andrew and William understood the cruelty hidden behind the fake gentle smile of Camilla. When William opened the file, he did not just see legal evidence or dirty letters, he saw the sharpest sword to protect his dynasty and that of Catherine, his wife, his perfect princess, from the filthy tentacles. Camilla had spent her whole life calculating, but she never anticipated that the fatal blow to overthrow her would come from the very man she once despised the most. Holding in his hands the destructive file from the ex-husband of his stepmother, many wondered what core motive turned a peace-loving William into an uncompromising warrior. The answer does not lie in the greed for power, but in a tearful oath nearly 3 decades ago, and a cruel betrayal from his own flesh and blood. Let us step back in time, returning to the dark August days of the year 1997. Audiences worldwide will never forget the image of a 15-year-old boy, bowing his head, walking behind the coffin of his mother. That tragic picture was etched into history, but behind the bowed face of William that day was a broken heart and a smoldering fire of resentment waiting to ignite. His mother, Princess Diana, a symbol of compassion and radiance, was pushed to a dead end, drained both physically and mentally by the poisonous presence of the third person named Camilla. That cunning woman, whom Diana once called a Rottweiler dog, brazenly stripped away the happiness of his family, destroying his childhood with dirty, cowardly schemes in the dark. Right on that tragic funeral day, William made a deeply engraved oath to the soul of his mother that no tragedy would ever be allowed to repeat itself. No manipulative person would be granted the right to trample on this family ever again. It was that oath that shaped the Prince William of today. He took the trouble to seek, protect, and build a solid home beside Princess Catherine, a woman with true royal demeanor, gathering enough grace, wisdom, and noble dignity that Camilla could never buy with any whitewashing tricks. But the ambition of Camilla never stopped. She continued to extend her filthy tentacles to manipulate the throne. And William knew it was time for him to draw his sword. However, the real breaking point, the stab through the heart that turned William into a cold-blooded future king, did not lie in the all-too-obvious crimes of Camilla. It lay in the lines inside the secret document that Andrew Parker Bowles handed over. When flipping through each page of the file, a terrifying truth was exposed. King Charles was not a passively blind, lovesick man at all. The last absolute trust of William for his father shattered into pieces. The file proved that Charles had clearly grasped every move, every dirty trick of Camilla from the early days. Not only did he not stop her, but he also actively covered up, paved the way, and used the entire media machine of the palace to protect his mistress, ignoring the fact of throwing his ex-wife Diana to the wolves to be torn apart. More disgustingly, Charles used his own biological son as a cheap public relations tool. Remember the youth of William, when he was forced to appear before the cameras, forcing awkward smiles, standing next to the person who destroyed the life of his mother. Charles forced William to swallow the ultimate pain inside, forcing him to play the role of an obedient, understanding son, just so the public would gradually accept the presence of Camilla. The aristocratic elite always preaches that the royal family requires sacrifice. Every member must sacrifice their ego for the survival of the crown. William understood that. But what he realized in the moment of reading these documents was betrayal on an inhumane level. His father did not sacrifice himself for the crown at all. He brought the soul, mental health, and honor of his own son to the sacrificial altar just to exchange for the safety and status of the one who ruined their family. This heartless lie is an unforgivable crime. It not only severed the father and son bond, but also released a monster inside William, a man determined to purge all hypocrisy. Under the pressure of uncontrollable rage and the undeniable evidence resting in his hands, William no longer kept a conciliatory attitude. He did not beg, he ordered. Holding the file exposing the entire filthy complicity of the public relations machine of the king, William backed Charles into a corner. He laid down a firm ultimatum. Either Charles had to accept gradually stripping away the power tentacles of Camilla in the future, or William would walk away from this terrible play, bringing down the image of an already shaking dynasty. Facing the fiery eyes of his son and the fatal evidence, King Charles, a man who was always weak and faltered before real crises, could not resist. All the authority of an aging king vanished. Faced with the risk of losing the support of his brightest heir, and more importantly Princess Catherine, the only image savior of the royal family right now, Charles was forced to bow his head and agree to the demands of William through an urgent closed-door meeting. True power had slipped from the hands of Charles to transfer to the man carrying the resilient blood of Diana. And when the cup spilled over, the endurance ended. The moment William held the file and stepped into the private room of King Charles, the atmosphere at Windsor was tense, signaling an irreversible overthrow. And now let us return to the first setting of the story, where all power illusions of this fake dynasty were smashed. The scene now is a quiet but extremely suffocating closed room in the ancient Windsor Castle. Dim light shone through the giant stained glass windows, illuminating the cold marble walls and the oak furniture that had witnessed centuries of ups and downs of the crown. But in that suffocating space, a ruthless, uncompromising transfer of power was taking place. This time, there were no fake smiles before the cameras, no empty speeches prepared by the massive public relations machine of the palace. There was only the truth and a death sentence for the usurper. Prince William stepped into the room, towering and majestic. His appearance was no longer that of a young prince who was once forced to bow his head, biting his teeth to swallow tears, to walk beside the mistress who destroyed his family. His presence now carried the full weight of a true king mastering the kingdom. Behind him was the proud silhouette of Princess Catherine, a woman born with perfect royal demeanor, a wonderful mother, and the most solid haven, who had stood by his side through every storm. The legitimacy and shining dignity of Catherine only highlighted the filth and dirt of the woman standing opposite them right now. The sound of a thick stack of documents thrown hard onto the mahogany table echoed, tearing through the suffocating atmosphere of the room. That was an indictment from the shadows, a file containing every dirty scheme, every despicable manipulation that Camilla and King Charles had covered up together for decades. We may be familiar with cheap reality television shows, where conflicts always come with piercing screams, reckless cursing, or scenes of throwing things at each other. But ladies and gentlemen, in the elite, at the peak of the British upper aristocracy, people never quarrel. People do not lower themselves with market language. They kill each other with silence. A cold, bone-chilling silence that is absolutely destructive. When the stack of documents fell onto the table, not a single person uttered a sound. King Charles, the man who bore the name of the sovereign of the Commonwealth, could only slump down into the leather-upholstered armchair. His eyes dropped, evading the fiery gaze of his eldest son. His shoulders slouched in a pathetic manner. The silence of Charles at that moment was precisely the silence of an accomplice caught red-handed, a silent, undeniable surrender. It exposed the disgusting weakness of a king who had traded away the very soul of his own son in exchange for soothing his fiercely ambitious mistress. By failing to utter any justification, Charles drove the nail into the coffin containing his own imperial power with his own hands. He realized that the throne he was sitting on was ultimately just a hollow title, as true power had now completely transferred into the hands of the man standing towering before him. And in the corner of the room, Camilla stood there, turned to stone. The greatest gold digger in royal history, the sinister witch who spent half a century using dirty schemes to force her way into a happy family, overthrow Princess Diana, and brazenly place the blood-stained crown upon her head, was finally driven into a corner. The fake arrogant smile she usually used to charm Charles and deceive the public had now vanished, replaced by extreme panic hidden deep within her darting eyes. In that moment, Camilla realized a truth. The two greatest shields protecting her life had shattered and completely split in two. The first shield, King Charles, the spineless husband who covered up all her sins, was now merely a helpless old man, not daring to lift his face to look at his son, nor having enough strength to protect her from the overwhelming fury of the future king. The second shield, the patient endurance of William, something Camilla always assumed she had successfully manipulated, had now turned into a blood-stained sword pointing straight at her throat. That cunning woman looked at William, and in his cold gaze she did not see leniency. She only saw the silhouette of Diana returning to collect a debt of blood. She understood that the crown on her head was merely borrowed, a fake piece of jewelry that would be stripped away the moment the heart of Charles stopped beating. The entire Parker Bowles faction, the entire network of tentacles she had painstakingly embedded into this dynasty, was being broken off one by William using an iron hand. The silent surrender of King Charles and the pathetic collapse of Camilla inside that closed room was a historical testament. It affirmed that the British throne does not belong to deceivers and manipulators. William showed them that his endurance and that of Princess Catherine was not weakness, but the patience of a lion before delivering the final blow to its prey. The verdict had been pronounced inside the closed room at Windsor, but in the elite upper echelons of power, an execution without an audience was never enough. Prince William, a future sovereign with a sharp strategic mind and a heart of ice toward the enemies of his family, understood this all too well. He needed the aristocracy, the politicians, and the entire British public to witness the truth with their own eyes, who was truly running the game. He needed to strip away the mask of Camilla, tear apart the illusory cloak of power she had brazenly hoarded, and humiliate her faction in broad daylight. And two events taking place right after that confrontation in the private room became the most public slaps, the most ruthless and spectacular punishments a future king ever inflicted upon a usurper. First was the shocking event at the most prestigious charity gala in London, where over 100 VIP guests, the absolute elite of high society holding the economic and political destiny of the United Kingdom, were gathering. All curious eyes focused on the main entrance, where power was measured by who could walk in with their head held high. Tom Parker Bowles, the son of Camilla who always lived in an illusion of strength, accustomed to freeloading and swaggering under the shadow of his scheming mother, stepped forward in a sharp tuxedo. He tilted his chin up, fully convinced that the honorary label of stepson of the Queen would automatically swing every door wide open and bring about bowing and scraping. But no. What awaited him was not a glorious red carpet, but a ruthless wall of royal security forces, who now took orders from only one true master, Prince William. Right before hundreds of curious eyes and sharp camera lenses waiting to capture the moment, the arrogant commoner was blocked. "Excuse me, sir, your name is not on the exclusive palace list." A concise, decisive statement without a shred of courtesy rang out. Tom turned deeply red, his pride wounded, as he stammered and tried to explain, threatening to invoke his mother's name. But the guards stood towering, their gazes as cold as stone statues. Humiliation reached its peak. All the guests stood there, whispering amongst themselves, covering their mouths with smirks, as they witnessed the son of the shameless mistress being tossed out of the doors of prestige, returning to the exact position of a sleepwalking lowlife. But the most ruthless psychological torture was not reserved for Tom, but for Camilla herself. She was standing right inside the hall, dressed magnificently in jewels that originally belonged to Diana, witnessing the utter and shameful humiliation of her biological son. Any normal mother would have gone mad, rushing out and screaming. But Camilla could not move. Dozens of media lenses were pointed straight at her face like gun barrels. Hundreds of pairs of guest eyes were scrutinizing, waiting for a good show to take back to their exclusive clubs as a joke. She was locked tightly inside the cage of prestige she had traded her dignity to enter. Under the absolute dominance of the power network William had cast, the Queen had to grit her teeth until they bled, swallow the bitter lump down her throat, and force a fake, wrinkled smile, trying to act nonchalant before the lenses. That was extreme psychological torture. It seared a bitter truth into her mind. The crown on her head could be stolen, but she and the parasites in her family would forever remain outsiders, uninvited tag-along guests. The first blow of humiliation was meant to warn public opinion, but William knew he had to strike the second blow straight at the heart of the royal family. Christmas Eve at Sandringham Estate. For decades, the Christmas tradition was the most sacred and symbolic event, showcasing the unity of the crown. Camilla, with her deep malice, had always plotted to stuff her commoner children and grandchildren into the official banquet, intending to brainwash the public and take fake photos to prove that the Parker Bowles faction was now on equal footing with the Windsor bloodline. But under the new reign being established by William with an iron fist, that filth needed to be thoroughly cleaned out. Weeks before the holiday break, William strode into the office of King Charles, carrying not the submissiveness of a son, but the posture of one holding the life of the dynasty. He threw down a firm and unshakable ultimatum: either me or her family. A statement as sharp as a razor blade, cutting off all the dirty schemes of Camilla and blocking the escape route of the puppet king. William drew a clear final boundary. If the shadow of the Parker Bowles freeloaders dared to wander into the Sandringham living room, he, the radiant Princess Catherine, and their 3 children, the only saviors bringing light and public support to the royal family at this moment, would immediately turn around and leave. Charles was driven into a corner. The spineless king had to make a choice: preserve the bright future of the crown, or tolerate the family of his overly aging second wife. Naturally, the coward always chooses to bow his head. Charles conceded pathetically. And as a result, on Christmas Eve that year, the gates of Sandringham Castle slammed shut in the face of Camilla's family. While William and Catherine shone brilliantly like gods, walking amid the absolute reverence of the public and demonstrating the noble character of a true royal family, the Parker Bowles family was completely excluded from the official banquet. They were cast to the sidelines, banned from the historical frame, exactly like withered leaves swept away from the palace courtyard. Their humiliating absence was not a backstage accident. It was a bloody message written with power. This was the most public and resounding declaration that the new reign had come under the control of Prince William. A reign revolving around loyalty, honor, and purity. While ruthlessly casting aside all the dirty residues the cunning stepmother had smeared onto the legacy of Princess Diana. The evildoer who had once triumphed over the tears of another woman now had to tremble and watch her entire stronghold be chopped into pieces. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps what began with the smooth manipulation of Camilla over decades is now ending with a wall of ice erected by the son of her rival. Looking back at this filthy royal power play, we realize a very grim paradox in the deep palace. You can use the most despicable schemes to win a battle, but you will surely suffer a crushing defeat in the ruthless war against time. Yes, we cannot deny that the cunning witch once tasted victory. Camilla succeeded in stealing Charles from his legal wife, using extreme shamelessness to snatch a crown that never rightfully belonged to her, and manipulating the entire media machine to deceitfully fool the public. But alas, that greedy woman forgot a core truth of power: that stolen glory is extremely fragile. She lost, losing bitterly in the long war. Because the blood-stained crown on her head actually possessed no intrinsic value. The power of that shameless mistress only existed, only gleamed as long as the chest of that old and spineless King Charles was still beating. The moment the breath of Charles stops, all of Camilla's illusions of dominance will instantly be crushed into dust. The exact second Prince William officially steps onto the throne beside the flawless Princess Catherine, the only one deserving of the title of Queen, history will be cleansed and rewritten from scratch. The tag-along Parker Bowles parasites will be mercilessly swept out of the palace. There will not be a shred of leniency, and surely not a single page of history will be allowed to preserve the fake praises she painstakingly orchestrated. Look deep into the eyes of the future king. That is a man who spent his entire life tormented by the need to ensure the legacy and great name of Princess Diana would never fade, never be stained by any impostor. He will never, ever allow the filthy ghost of Camilla to obscure the radiant and pure glory of his reign. This life-or-death battle is not just beginning now. The death sentence for Camilla's power was sealed all the way back in 1997. Right at the moment, a 15-year-old boy bowed his head, walking behind his mother's coffin, swallowing his tears back down, and silently vowing to the London sky that the ultimate evildoer would eventually pay the price.